Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hope McManus, and I am the head of health and safety for Peninsula, Canada. Looking forward to speaking with you all today. So we will give it a few moments and allow some people to join, and we will start the presentation. So let's give it about 5 more minutes before we jump into our topics for today. While we are waiting for some other members to join, I will give you a little bit of a background as to what Peninsula Canada is, a little bit about myself, talk a little bit about the news broadcasts that have come out most recently with respects to COVID. So, like I said, my name is Hope McManus. I am head of health and safety for Peninsula Canada. I've had a background in health and safety for the majority of my career, working as a health and safety professional, senior manager at Air Canada, as well as working at a global engineering firm called WSP, working on their safety team as well. So very pleased to get to speak with you today about health and safety and how it's pertaining to COVID right now. We've had some exciting developments across Canada, just about how many other businesses are allowed to open. So that's fantastic news and congratulations. We are extremely excited to have you. We're extremely excited to have you during this conversation today. So a little bit about Peninsula before we get into the presentation. Peninsula is a global health and safety and HR consulting firm. We are currently on 3 continents. So we are in Europe, in Australia, and in Canada. We originally started in Europe and then moved to Australia, expanded into Australia, and most recently in 2017, we were able to take the leap and spread our wings into Canada. So in 2017, we had just launched in Canada, predominantly HR, and now with a more health and safety focus in the last couple of years. Globally, we have about 80,000 clients, and just in Canada, we have 4,000, and that is growing. So we haven't checked the most recent number, but we are on our way to expanding to help small and medium-sized businesses. So that is our target audience, is small and medium-sized businesses, really to help you with your HR and health and safety functions. So really excited to talk about that today. Really how this live session will go is that if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the box as you see on Facebook Live, and I will do my best to answer these questions. If we don't have the answer, then absolutely give us a call, or we'll take down your information and we'll call you after the call just to give you the information that you may require. So we're in a very exciting time right now where COVID has now, albeit has not disappeared, and we don't foresee it disappearing for quite a while, just due to the pandemic and the lack of availability of a vaccination. But as we do see the curve starting to flatten, which essentially means that hospitals can now afford to take more people into their care. Now, essentially, we see that many businesses are able to move into the stage 2 of opening and stage 3 of opening. So stage 1, we really just talked about essential businesses. Especially in the Ontario regulation, there was a very strict list of essential businesses, and all non-essential businesses were ordered to close. In stage 2, now we do see that we are able to have more businesses open, which is fantastic. And as you will see in BC, we have especially more businesses that we're on the horizon for stage 3. And we'll get into that a little bit later. It's important to remember that when you are reopening your business, and wherever your business is located, every jurisdiction is a little bit different in the way that we're operating in the midst of COVID. We have BC following a little bit of a different regulation, whereas Ontario is following their own regulations. So just keep notes. It's very important to stay close and see exactly what your provincial jurisdiction is mandating you to do. For example, WorkSafe BC, which is British Columbia's governing body, does require that you post the return to work plan. So that's a little bit of a minor variance, something that you want to pay close attention to. So I do see a question coming in, and this is from Gemma. Hi, Gemma. We are in an office in Ontario. Offices are not part of phase 2, but can some of our staff go in? It's a very good question, Gemma. So under the Ontario law right now, there are staff that are able to go into the office, but there are certain criteria that it falls under. So if the work that they have to do needs to be done at the office and they deem it essential, then yes, they can go into the office. If they are preparing the office to be reopened for staff in stage 3, specifically for Ontario, then they are allowed to be in. So at this time, specifically for Ontario, typically those are the only reasons, and there's another reason in the Ontario Act that we have to abide by. When you're talking about British Columbia as well as Alberta really does have offices encompassed in their stage 2 plan. So like I was saying a little bit before, a couple minutes ago, there are different provinces that have different frameworks. So while Ontario at the last minute, June 22nd, decided to remove offices from their stage 2 plan, BC did move ahead and have offices encompassed in their stage 2 process. If you are opening up your offices, you want to remember that, keep it very straightforward for yourself. It's very easy to get lost in the weeds. But you want to make sure that essentially when you do open up your office, you are able to have workers maintain that social distancing. So when we're talking about social distancing, of course, it's that 2-meter rule. And if you can't maintain social distancing, given the nature of your business, maybe you have to have more workers attending. Make sure you have proper engineering controls in place. So plexiglass, physical things that you're putting in the workplace to make it safer. So I hope that answers your question, Gemma. Supriya Sharma, so how many people have been inspected? It's a really good question, and it's very good for all of you to know this. So essentially, there have been to date 500 inspectors out, just not in Ontario alone. Of those 500 inspectors, they have done 10,000 inspections and provided 5,500 orders and shut down 22 job sites. So the Ontario government, as well as BC and Alberta, they are taking the COVID situation very seriously, as we can see this. We see different provinces taking a conservative approach depending on the time that they lock down in regards to reopening. But all the governing bodies seem to have made advisory committees really derived of infection disease control specialists, public health officials, medical practitioners that are really guiding them on how to reopen and the steps that we should be saying to the public and businesses, employers and employees. So it's very, very important that when you see this number, it seems like a pretty big number. They are there to try to help you. However, they will most likely give you an order during the time that they are helping you. So they have certain criteria that you have to make sure that you are respecting, which is, like I said, social distancing, hand washing. What's your plan if someone does get COVID? Do you have that? Have you trained your staff? If you don't have that, then yes, you can face the possibility of getting an order, or worst case scenario, having your workplace shut down. 22 job sites doesn't seem like a lot, and hopefully that number stays below. And I suspect to be honest, it will, just based on more information that is coming up by the government that is allowing businesses to have more clarity and understand how the rules worked. We were all dealing with a very foreign concept to ourselves. Businesses have been through a lot right now, so it's very difficult to try to navigate through it yourself. And that's why we try to help you and build that documentation for you. So it's one less thing for you to worry about. when we are talking about social distancing signs, that's what they're going to be looking for when they're inspecting your workplace. Do you have the signage up? So we have that for you. We have some examples of toolbox kits, toolbox talks. Essentially what a toolbox talk is it's a training session to say that your employees properly understand the risk and the hazards that you've identified, and in addition to that, the controls that you have in place. So the hazard, obviously we know, is COVID. The best thing that we can do when you are talking to a safety professional is eliminate the hazard. Of course, we cannot eliminate COVID because there is no vaccination. So then we have to go through the next course of controls. So can we substitute the hazard for another hazard? Can your employees work from home? If that's a possibility, that's something that you want to consider. And that's really just based on your workplace. There are, if your government is allowing staff to return into a phase, such as offices, that means that public health has looked at the information and, given the governments, the workplaces, the go ahead to do that. If not, then you want to go down to the next, and if that is the fact that they do have to come into the office for your place of business, then you want to make sure that you have the next step, which is engineering controls. And like I said, engineering controls, this is making sure you have the decals on the floor, the posters up, the physical barriers. If you have people that are working at cash, how often is their interaction with the public, right? So those are controls that you want to put in place. And on top of that, you want to essentially change the way people work. You'll see that the City of Toronto put out a new bylaw that comes into effect, I believe it was as of yesterday, which was July 7th, that masks are mandatory in most indoor public spaces. So when we talk about indoor public spaces, we're talking about malls, we're talking about restaurants, anywhere that the public can come in and out freely. So you want to make sure that's also a safe work procedure that you have to make sure that your customers know about, and also your staff if they are dealing with members of the public on a regular basis. So make sure that you incorporate that into the plan. You may be wondering how. Make sure that they're trained. This is what we really specialize in helping our clients with, is showing them how to train their staff properly, giving them the appropriate tools and resources, especially trying to navigate through this challenging time. We know that there's a whole HR side, there's a whole health and safety side. So having that documentation will help better prepare you for when you are able to open up your doors. But a long way to answer your question is, yes, there have been quite a few people inspected. There will be more inspections happening on top of that. So just make sure that you're well equipped. If the inspector, whether it's WorkSafe BC or the Alberta governing body or Ministry of Labour, those are all the governing bodies that may come in. If they see that the workplace is really consistently driving an effort, they are going to work with you. The places that have been shut down are mostly due to social distancing infringements. So they'll walk into a building and let's say we're talking about a restaurant. We have a bunch of chefs, really just standing and infringing on that social distancing rule. Or the employer may not necessarily have the proper engineering controls in place just due to the work environment that they have. So those are some things that you want to consider when you are looking at opening up your doors again, just to make sure that if you are inspected, you can successfully pass that inspection. We have a really good news story on that as well, where one of our field consultants for health and safety actually walked one of our current clients through some suggestions and ideas through their workplace. And this can be done over the phone. We have advisors available. We have consultants available, and that's how they're devising your manuals. Sometimes they'll go to site, just depending on the risk level, or they can do it virtually. And as that was done, we got a call back from the client, and it was just in regards to an MOL inspection that he had. So essentially the MOL inspection that he had, I'm sorry, I apologize. I think the light just went out on me. So I'll try to get that fixed. So essentially what had happened, which was a really good news story, is we had a call from the client that was extremely excited, saying that MOL came in after they had put our recommended practices in place. And essentially, the MOL inspector was blown out of the water. So that's a really good news story. And it's just an example, and it goes to vote and really say, this is the great work that we can provide you. To have an MOL inspector really promote and say, this is fantastic, and this is this is a great, it's a really good opportunity to, really talk about our services and how we're going to better prepare you. So, just wanted to give you an example of a really good scenario and how we're better preparing our clients. And our client was, of course, ecstatic. I can tell you I've worked with many regulators before, both on the federal and provincial side. And what's really important to them is just essentially making sure that your workplace is safe. So, employees have the right to come to work and feel safe, and they have the right to go home, to their family safe at the end of the day. And you as the employer have, under the law and an ethical obligation to make sure that you are providing a safe workplace as reasonably practical. We know that we are not going to eliminate hazards indefinitely in a workplace. And whether we're talking about COVID, whether we're talking about, something else, another hazard that may arise, we're not going to be able to always make it go away. And that could just be due to the nature of the work that's carried out in your workplace. The most important thing for you to do as an employer is really take a look at your hazards and say, well, I can't make this hazard completely go away. How am I going to reduce it to something that's as low as reasonably possible? So how am I going to minimize the hazard and put the right controls in place to make sure that the likelihood of someone getting hurt is low? And therein, if an injury does occur, we can go back and say, well, we've done our due diligence. There's absolutely no way to eliminate this hazard, COVID right now, but we have followed World Health Organization guidelines. We have followed CDC guidelines. We have followed CCOHS guidelines. And those are just the bodies that you want to consult, right? We quite frequently stay abreast with World Health Organization, CDC, in pursuing reports and making sure that our information is updated. We know that when we are talking about COVID-19, there's a potential for this disease to mutate, and there has been evidence that, from epidemiologists, that it does mutate. So because of the changing of the scientific evidence that we are receiving from World Health Organization and reports, it's important that you look at that and say, okay, now what is the severity now, and what's the risk, and how do I reduce it? And while we, move together throughout this course of navigating through COVID, you're going to realize that some of the controls that you put into place initially have to be adjusted. And that's the importance of really making sure that you're consistently reassessing your plan. When you put a plan in place to deal with COVID or any hazard, you can't simply put the plan into place and walk away. You're always going to have to reassess. And that assessment date may be 2 weeks, it may be 4 weeks, it may be less than that. Depending on governing official announcements, you may have to make changes quite rapidly. And a prime example is what I spoke about before when we are talking about really the mask bylaw that was introduced by the City of Toronto. So when we initially talked about stage 1 and stage 2 for workplaces that were opening, and this will now encompass stage 3, and Ontario is not in stage 3 yet, but I would say if the trend continues to decline based on statistics and cases, we would be on track in about a month or so. But however, that could change depending on cases, right? It's very hard to make calls on dates, and there's a lot of frustration with many employers and clients just on the lack of the ability for not only the government but public health to make certain dates as hard cutoffs. And that's really just dependent on the cases that are reported. If we see an influx of cases, then Ontario will have to regress, and that will have to be with BC as well. So like I'm mentioning, when we see the bylaw changes that come in, whether we are talking about having to wear masks or the ability for the Ontario government especially to regress into stage 1 and stage 2, and that is a vote that's being undertaken right now to see if the Ontario government will have the permission to actually regress into stage 1 if they feel they need to. That's really why it's important, and not to go down a rabbit hole, but that's the importance of having to make sure that we really stay close to our controls that we put in place, because the controls that you put in place today could be ineffective in 2 to 3 weeks based on governing updates that come out. So stay close to that. It's very important that you take that into consideration, that you don't just put something into place and you walk away from it. And that really extends beyond COVID. As we move forward with technological advances, we find as we go through and learn more and educate more in the health and safety world, there are other measures that evolve from creativity and really analytical thinking and seeing how we can make the workplace safer. And that's through technological advancement. It's through better engineering controls that are devised and invented through times of COVID and whatnot. But those are ways that you want to keep abreast, because really the goal for health and safety is to really work towards health and safety excellence. We want to make sure that you guys are the industry leaders for your business. Let us handle your business. We'll let you handle your business, and let us take care with you the health and safety aspect and the HR aspect. It's a lot to wrap your head around. Health and safety regulations, I hear this quite often, can seem pretty intimidating. But really, when you get to the crux of health and safety regulations, it's to make sure that workplaces are safe, like I mentioned. And that's how they're built. So common sense, and to make sure that they are built. Another good point that you guys may want to consider is some of your staff may have to take health and safety training. They may have health and safety training, such as working at heights, etc. In those instances, just because of COVID, just an important thing to take note, we did talk to MOL and IHSA, which is the Infrastructure Health and Safety Association, that there is a leniency on training renewal. So what does that mean? It means that if you have someone that is trained, let's give an example of working at heights. So if you have someone that works at heights and they have a working at heights certification, that's great, fantastic. But let's say their working at heights certification expires May 2020, July 2020. Now IHSA, which is one of the main trainers for working at heights, is introducing a leniency to really say as long as they've went through that training before and their training would have expired during the midst of COVID, there is a lax on having them continue to work as long as they have the initial training. Where you cannot continue is if you were scheduled to do training. So say you were scheduled to do working at heights training and you were not able to do it because of COVID. You have to have some basis of training to go off of. You can't send an unexperienced worker into the workplace without any training whatsoever. In fact, a lot of workplace fatalities or injuries are really predominantly, and this is across Canada, when we're talking about Alberta statistics, BC statistics, and Ontario statistics, a lot of worker injuries are more so on the younger part, where we have inexperienced workers, very young workers that are just not well equipped with the experience nor the training in some instances, and that's how injuries occur. Interestingly enough, to marry that with the COVID situation, CDC and World Health Organization as well are reporting that a lot of the cases that are coming out from COVID-19 are ages 20 to 29. So typically you see some behavioral aspect going off that really talks about how there is a frustration on the younger adults generation, ages 20 to 29, where they are getting frustrated and going out. So, how does that affect your workplace? That's something that you want to take into consideration as well. And when you're educating them on the severity of it, and I was just looking at an article this morning on Canada.ca, COVID is still considered a very high risk. It's not lowered. Just because we flatten the curve does not mean that we are safe to, absolutely resume what we were doing before pre-COVID. And you have to assume that we are going to be living with that reality until a vaccination is put into place. So by educating workers, including the younger workers, just take some time to invoke the seriousness of COVID-19. Because, when you are 20 to 29, you do think that you are somewhat invincible. So just instilling that through proper training will make sure that, they understand, like I said, the seriousness of COVID-19, because it still does remain a high risk. And, also what you need to start being cognizant of is, we at Peninsula are already preparing documentation talking about a second wave. So we have seen across the world that there has been second outbreaks in Asia, in Beijing, and they are trying to handle it right now. And just to give you an example of the potential mutation strain of the virus, the one case in Asia really talked about how one member of the public went out to one nightclub, and as a result, that was an infected member, and as a result, they infected 34 people that one night. So it just goes to show you the seriousness of the virus and how badly it does spread, and being cognizant of that information when you are opening up your workplace. Because, if a second wave, when a second wave does hit, is your business prepared to handle that? Now, there are some arguments and speculations given the fact that we would have social distancing measures in place and the wearing of masks mandatory that can reduce the spread by up to 70%. And that's why there has been a push on masks. But you have to make sure that you are equipped to have a plan in place for that as well. There have been governing bodies that are preparing to make a plan for the second wave hitting Canada. It's very hard to put a timeline on it. I know everyone is very anxious. I can definitely say with all the clients that we do speak that are calling the advice line, which is available 24/7, that is their concern is, how are we making sure that we are prepared for that second wave that might hit us? So take that into consideration, reach out to us. The really good benefit about Peninsula is that we do have a advice line that's pretty much available at all times. And if there is a quiet hour, if there's an emergency, it is escalated to even myself. We have all, the executive team that is available to take any calls, which may be a work refusal, a critical illness or injury, stuff like that. So you may have an instance where, because of COVID right now, some staff feel unsafe coming into the workplace. It's a very real reality. We're having many, many work refusals being reported. And the reports of work refusals, I'm sure that you may have seen that, the Toronto Transit Commission did have a work refusal that was put forward by their workers. It was hereby denied as no danger, as it was in the normal course of their employment, and the employers did have proper controls in place. So, really to go back to Supriya's comment before, is making sure that you have those controls in place is key to making sure that if you do have a work refusal happen, you are prepared. So, what we do offer is our advice line to walk you through when you have a work refusal. We are getting prepared to make sure that we have people on standby, that if this does happen for our clients, we are able to walk them through. So it's very important that you feel supported throughout that. The work refusal process, that in itself can seem quite intimidating. So, I'll just kind of give you a rundown of how the work refusal process works. So, and like I said, guys, I do encourage you to ask any questions if you feel that you may have just in the comment bar, and I'll do my best to answer it. If you're sick of me talking about one particular subject. So while we're waiting for questions, I'll educate you guys on the work refusal aspect. So essentially what's going to happen is an employee is going to come into your work one day and say, I don't feel safe to come into work. And what you need to do is understand directly what the hazard is that they feel unsafe about. When you are dealing with work refusals, it's another ball game. It's not just, I don't feel like coming to work today, and that's how many employees actually end up servicing their work refusals, is that they just don't want to come in today. So they have to have a specific reason for not wanting to come in. And it has to be specific to their job task or something that they feel that if you make them do in the course of employment is going to put them in imminent danger or someone else in imminent danger. Now, an important notation about this is that this does not apply to healthcare employees, just because of the course of their work. So yes, they can work refuse, but to the point where it says someone else's life may be in danger, that's a whole nother ballgame, and that's something you may want to give us a call about. But generally, when I'm talking about workplaces and work refusals, when they have told you the specific course or action that they are being asked to do, they feel they're being put in imminent danger, what you want to do is work with that employee together, and this is step one, where you want to say to your employee, are you refusing to work? Yes, I am refusing to work. So get that down, write that down, make sure that you are taking clear documentation of it, and talk about the controls that you have in place. So let's say that you have a cashier that's not comfortable coming to work because of COVID. Take the time to work with that cashier and say, well, here's the physical barrier that we have, or here's the social distancing that we have. Talk to them about contactless payment or the other measures that you have put into effect to help that. At that point, if you and the employee cannot find a resolution, then you need to look at bringing in your health and safety rep or joint health and safety committee member. Depending on your workplace, if you have 5 or around the 5 mark, you can have a health and safety rep, or less than 5, it's a health and safety rep. Or if you have 20 or more, you can have a joint health and safety committee member. So if at that point you're not successful in the first step of resolving that, bring in your health and safety rep. And I need to remind you, if you have a unionized workforce, you are all there to work together to find a resolution. I do see, and from previous experience, that sometimes there's an agenda to push, and that's what you need to be careful about. There are certain people that may do work refusals just to build a case against the company and your organization. So that's why it's very important to document. And when you are dealing with unionized environments as well, that may come up, may not, but there is a risk that it may come up as well. So just be cognizant of that. Be professional. Remind each other that you're here to make sure that it's a safe work environment. That is the goal. Bring people back to the common goal. If you have multiple people refusing the same time, what's important for you to remember is that you have to have a spokesperson elected. So let's say you have 5 cashiers that don't want to come into work, and they're ultimately work refusing tonight's shift, July 8th at 5:30. Instead of dealing with 5 cashiers, make sure that the 5 cashiers nominate a spokesperson to air their concerns to. Just make it cleaner and just have one person. So as a result, stage 2, you have the spokesperson or the employee who is refusing. And in addition to that, you're going to have the health and safety rep. If at that point you're still not able to find a resolution, at this point is when you're going to call in the governing body. So MOL, WorkSafe BC, or the Alberta governing body. It's important for you to know it can seem very intimidating. So an inspector can come in and essentially close down your workforce if they do believe that it is unsafe, and they may prevent you from opening until they believe that it is safe. That's why it's very important that you abide by the orders that you are given to make sure that you can open up as quickly as possible. But sometimes it's not necessarily a bad thing to have MOL come in and inspect your workplace, and I'll tell you why. If you have the proper controls in place, if you have done everything you can possible to make your workplace safe as reasonably, and under the legislation it says employers have the responsibility to make their workplace safe as reasonably practical. If you have done that, the MOL inspector, or let's just say the inspector, when we're talking about Canada, may turn around and say to the employee, this is in the normal course of your duties. The employer has taken all reasonable and practical measures to keep you safe. As a result, the risk is as low as reasonably possible, and you need to now return to work. That employee can no longer refuse the work after that. They have to resume duties. If they choose not to, that's job abandonment, or that's a refusal to, that's a performance issue, because you now have a governing body telling you and backing you up and saying, well, the official governing body came in and inspected and said that I was safe, so you have to go back to work. Now, that doesn't mean that the employee can't appeal it. You can always appeal it. The employer can always appeal a decision by the governing body, as can the employee. But during the course of the appeal, the employee has to go back to work. They cannot choose to stay home until another decision is made. So, that's where we want to make sure that you are very supported here, because like I said, it can seem very intimidating to have to deal with that, to have to deal with a governing body. But make sure that you document, make sure that you call us to walk us through it. You have to, it's very hard if you're not reading the regulations every single day and watching for changes in the regulations every single day. But that's what we can help you out with. You'll know that, some companies that are federally regulated, there was a change to the definition of danger. And that's not something that all businesses are going to catch. All businesses are going to essentially, whether we like to be honest about it or not, is post it or reference it and not kind of look for updates or renewals every year. And that's what we do. We look for renewals every year. If there is changes that have to be made to your code or definitions, we keep you posted on that. So when we are talking about federal regulations that have come up with respect to right to refuse, it used to just be danger. What is danger? And as a result, there was many issues with the interpretation of danger when we're talking about employers and employees and inspections. It took quite a few years for the federal regulation to amend in the labor code to say imminent danger. So what is going to cause you imminent danger, and what may present an imminent danger that prevents you from doing your job? So those are things necessarily you may not catch, and it's very hard for employers to stay, like I said, posted on these types of changes that happen, and that's what we help you out with. And it could seem like it's a little bit of a minor change of a word, but imminent danger from just blatant danger is a major difference, and that could actually work to your advantage. So that's why it's important to make sure that you are aware of the changes, or you have a team or someone to help you stay abreast of changes like that, because that can make all the difference in your work refusals, and that can make all the difference in making sure that your work refusal is held as no danger. And if you see me pausing for a second, I say successful. I don't really want to say successful, because we want to make sure, the ultimate goal is to make sure our company and your company is successful by keeping people safe. So we really want to say that the decision of no danger is made when you do have a work refusal. So let us know, walk us through it if you do have, if you are really dealing with those types of things, then just, of course, let us know. So I have some questions coming through, and I'm sorry I wasn't scrolling quite down, so I do apologize. I will go through the questions now. So a question from Paulette. Hi, Paulette. How are you? In Waterloo region, people will be required to wear masks starting July 13 in public places. Our service and staff, reception and sales are operating behind plexiglass. Will they still be required to wear masks while interacting with customers? Paulette, it depends on your business. So if you are in the business of providing personal care services, you will most likely have to still wear a mask, yes. But it would be interesting to see just, the nature of your business first. So if you are if you are closely interacting with people, then you are going to have to make sure that you do uphold the masks. But if I was a betting person, and this is me commenting, just not knowing the full extent of your business, you probably will still have to wear the masks. And I expect to see this grow really more and become more mandatory across Canada. It's only a matter of time. So what I would recommend to you, Paulette, is just make sure that you have and are prepared for the order of getting your masks in order. We are seeing a surge in order from suppliers, and so just make sure that you get ahead of that. Typically what we are seeing right now is best demonstrated practices. Usually there's about 5 masks ordered per person. Now when you're talking about the type of masks, obviously you may already know this, but we want to stay away from the N95 masks. We want to reserve those for healthcare professionals. In addition to that, anything which is inappropriate, there's more information on our public website too that we can link to you, but on how the materials of, what the mask is made of and what's appropriate to use in order for your staff. So depending if you want to have reusable masks for them, there's suppliers that are getting ready to make those, and that's, you should just check with the supplier to make sure they are abiding by the recommendations on how the fabrication of the mask is completed. But if you are getting the non-surgical grade, just it's usually pink or blue. What you do want to make sure is you do want to make sure that you have, I would say, typically, because at best demonstrated practice, we are seeing businesses give a lot for about 5 per person. And just make sure that, when you are providing masks to your staff and your employees, that you really want to make sure that you train them properly. So when I say train properly, don't just give them the mask and walk away. Tell them on how to put the mask on, how to take it off, and also educating them on that even if they have the mask on, doesn't mean that they can easily infringe on the social distancing rule. They still have to follow through with the social distancing aspect. There has been studies by epidemiologists saying that it does promote a false sense of security. We know that the masks are not fully covered, so there are slits where droplets can still get out. So as Dr. Teresa Tam did say a couple weeks ago, is there to be used as an added layer of protection. We have been having very positive results. We've seen a 70% reduction, but it's also on how you're training and how you're telling people to wear the mask. So when they are putting on the mask, make sure that they put it on properly. Make sure that they have the nose cover directly hugging their nose, just to make sure it's the tightest fit as possible. We see a lot of people walking down the street. I know we all do, where they pull the mask down and they're walking down with it. That's a worst demonstrated practice. I would never recommend that. But what I would recommend is also telling them about hand hygiene when you are giving them masks. And the reason why I say that is you could have someone having a mask touching different surfaces. And just the way the nature of COVID is, what we know right now is, so COVID can live for up to 72 hours depending on the surface. So say a person walks into your area, touches a desk that has COVID, then touches their mask to bring it down. Well, they've just increased the risk of potentially contracting COVID by touching their nose, their eyes, where we do see that, essentially that's how the virus gets into someone's body. It goes in through the eyes, through the nose, through the mouth, and it really attaches itself to the blood vessels, and that's why we're seeing such a horrible mutation of COVID-19. So make sure, not to go down a rabbit hole, because I could talk about it all day, but just make sure that you are educating them on proper hand hygiene when you are giving them masks, okay? So there's another question that came in from Kathy. So Kathy, what if a staff says they aren't comfortable returning to work and would like to be laid off? Well, I would say, Kathy, I do see some HR prevalence coming through here as well. So I'm going to talk about the health and safety side first, and then let's dive a little bit into the HR side. But I would recommend you also call us just to get you, a better answer on more of the HR side too. Kathy, if you have put all the proper measures in place, and the employee still does not feel comfortable, you as the employer have made work available for them. So the emergency, I believe that, and our senior VP of legal actually was talking about this on one of our webinars earlier on in the other week, and I apologize because my light just went out. But essentially what you do want to do is you want to make sure that you have all the controls in place. Thank you. All the controls in place. And saying that yes, you are offering alternate work, and they are choosing not to accept it. So in that case, it could be, and this is where I say it kind of trickles into the HR portion. So it could potentially be, and this is a stance that you want to take as an employer, is a job abandonment, because they're deciding not to show up. If you're laying someone off or you're terminating them, that also, depending on your employment contract, may include severance pay. So that's something that you're going to have to take into consideration as well if you have an employment contract. We do know that the coverage the coverage for people that were put on layoff because of COVID-19 is expiring relatively soon. And that's, like I said, more the HR aspect. So they're not going to be able to use that for an indefinite amount of time. So like I said, something that you may want to take into consideration. Kathy, I would absolutely welcome you calling our line as well, just to talk about this, just because, like I said, the complexities of HR and HSC married together with each other. So like I said, just consider those options. But if you do have work for them, Kathy, then it would be the expectation they do return to work. Long story short. So I hope that partially answered your question. I apologize for the HR aspect, but we can get that information to you if you give us a call. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit to Supriya, and I do apologize, guys, if I did miss your questions. I was not scrolling like I should have. So what happens if one of my employees has a family member they live with test positive? Can they come into work? It's a good question. No. So what I would say is make sure that what's essentially going to happen is if your family member tests positive for COVID-19, what I would say is that person is going to call public health right away. In the background, public health is going to conduct a questionnaire with them. And the questionnaire essentially is going to cover a wide range of variety of questions. Those questions are then shipped off to CDC, and that's how we're getting our information from World Health Stats. So during one of the questions that are asked is they're going to ask them where they have been, what they were doing, and if they were in close contact with someone. So prolonged/close contact means that you're within the 2-meter rule, and World Health Organization has they're not definitive on, having a hard answer on this, and it's hard to try to blame them for this, but they really say essentially anything more than 3 minutes within 2 meters of each other, someone could be at risk. So what public health will do is they will do an assessment on the COVID-19 patient. They will obtain contact details from the patient, and they will call anyone who they feel are at risk. If they don't call you, they're not going to feel that you're at risk. They will just say, or not say to you, just carry it throughout your regular routine. If they do call you, they may say one or two things. They may say, we don't feel that you are at risk, but we want you to self-monitor. Self-monitor essentially means to public health, just, you can go about your daily routine. Just watch yourself, take your temperature twice a day. If you do see any of the symptoms that may be popping up, make sure that you get tested right away. Public health may also say, due to the situation, you were in close proximity with person X, we do require that you self-isolate for 14 days. And with that being said, you're going to have to self-isolate for 14 days. And you may also have to go for testing too. Now, if you have an employee that is in this situation, they go for testing, they get tested, and it comes back negative, they can come back to work. There is a lot of debate on when they can come back to work, and I know that my advisors have been working very hard, and we do love to do the legwork, so we had one of our advisors actually go to the clinic just to make sure that we are giving our clients the right information, just to set you up for success. So essentially, 24 hours after you do get a negative test, the employee should be able to return back to work. Sometimes they'll do what's called a secondary test. If they are doing a secondary test, you're most likely not going to be able to come back. But just really what I would say, and this is a really long-winded answer, but it's a question that we get quite often. That's why I want to digress with you on this one, is just make sure that you're following public health guidance. Because it's really not, during the time of COVID, there's not really a hard and fast rule, unfortunately. It's very, very hard to navigate through it. But what we do want to do in these cases is we want to stay close to public health. We want to stay very close to medical health professionals and the World Health Organization. Essentially, you may say why, because they're the ones that are looking at the scientific evidence. Really, the only way that we can put controls in place and the only way that we can build processes with COVID is working on scientific evidence. and, learning about the nature of the virus, where, if we do think a virus is airborne, and there have been some speculative reports coming out, but nothing yet confirmed, then that is a change of way that you're going to be doing business. So that's why it's important to, like I said, stay very close to public health officials. That's why we definitely stay close to public health officials when we are building these guides for you and these walkthroughs for you. Because, like I said, it can change. And just to give you some examples, I did deal with public health quite frequently in my last couple of positions. So this comes up quite often. And on a last note for that is, don't be alarmed if you do receive a call from public health, but they do not tell you the name. For privacy reasons, you are not able to know the name. All you are able to know is that there was a positive case in your workplace. And at that point, you're going to have to take the appropriate measures. So another question that comes in, that has come in. What if a staff member tests positive? So make sure that you have a COVID positive preparedness plan. So essentially what that's going to cover is, if someone tests positive, you have to make sure that prior to this happening, this is trying to get ahead of this as much as you possibly can. And I appreciate there's probably some concerns as, how do you stay ahead of something that's ever changing? How can you navigate through this properly? The best thing that you can do is try to control what you can control in your business, right? So what you can control is trying to develop a process for if someone tests positive. If someone does test positive, this is what we do know that we can do. That you're going to have a contact tracing plan in place prior to this happening. So essentially what that's going to mean is you're going to make sure that people are taking tally on their whereabouts. So if you need to go back and ask Hope McManus where Hope McManus was on, July 2nd, I can go back and tell you. And that's important to keep too, because public health may ask you that information. So make sure that you are having proper contact tracing. So if it does come up, you can provide that. Take a look at where the staff member was, if they were in your workplace with COVID or before they tested positive, and ensure that there's a proper disinfection that was carried out. World Health Organization has a list of, and so does Canada.ca, they have a list of the approved disinfectant cleaners to be used. So make sure that you have that area disinfected, make sure that you have it cordoned off. And what I would recommend as well, and this is purely a recommendation, but a best demonstrated practice, is prior to that staff member coming back to work, make sure that they do receive clearance from a medical practitioner. So we don't need to know that they don't have, the medical note essentially may not always say that yes, they don't have COVID anymore. They may just say they're clear to come back to work. And that's just, again, due to medical information that sometimes employers are not privy to. So as long as they have the medical certificate saying that they are clear, they are safe to be at work, then, they can proceed back into the workplace. But that would be, like I said, a recommendation I would do. I would follow that, just in the climate of what we're dealing with. So question from Christina, what do I do if my staff refuses to wear masks even though they've become mandatory in Ontario? Well, that's a very good question. So there's a two-tier thing. First of all, you have to consider your place of business. So does your place of business, let's say, again, for Toronto, for example, that's the most recent bylaw that's come into effect. Does your place of business fall under that bylaw? So is it a public space? So if it is or not, that's what you'll have to find out and give us a call. We are your advisors. We are here to tell you yes or no. That's what it is or what it is not. So if it comes to the fact that in fact you are part of the bylaw and your workplace does require staff and employees to wear masks, then that's really, a performance issue at that point. A lot of safety professionals like to make sure that we separate safety and performance, okay? So when we talk about safety and performance, behavioral, yes, they are separated, but there's also something that's called non-compliance. Non-compliance essentially means that you're performing an unsafe act that can put others at risk. So we unfortunately cannot tolerate that. So what I would do is I would, and this is what I would also link in with our HR team for, just because the nature of it, again, marrying very closely with HR, is it's a performance issue. So you have to make sure that if they are not abiding by the rules in your workplace, that the person is not in the workplace. Chances are, based on the climate that we're dealing with, safety does trump right now. So, they have the expectation, and also in the Ontario regulation, in the Occupational Health and Safety Act, they have the responsibility. They have 3 rights that are predominantly advertised. They have the right to know, they have the right to participate, and they have the right to refuse. They also have the right and they have the responsibility to make sure they are wearing PPE. So we talk about rights about employees, which is fantastic, but a lot of employers and employees tend to forget or negate the fact that employees have responsibilities too, just like employers. Employees have the responsibility to make sure that they are wearing the equipment that's provided with them in the appropriate manner. So that means, Christina, if you have a person come into your workplace that's mandated to wear a mask, does not want to wear a mask, or refuses to wear it properly, you can send them home, because they're infringing and they're actually committing an unsafe act, which is a non-compliance, which puts others at risk. If their unsafe act goes unnoticed or unapproached, they have a potential for spreading COVID-19 to your workplace. And really what you need to think about is the impact that will happen if there is a COVID case in your workplace because of that. And if all your staff members would need to get tested because, someone just simply wasn't wearing their mask properly. So, if you do have any other questions about that, feel free to give us, a call. It is something that we have to make sure that, you as employers are doing all you can to make that workplace safe. The employee needs to make sure that they are following that. They need to make sure they're attending the training. You need to have an open door approach, but there needs to be commitment on both sides. Safety ultimately is a partnership, and it's a partnership more than ever before, especially when we're talking about COVID-19. It's about employees and employers working together. And as employers, you need to recognize that you may not always see all the foreseeable hazards. So involving employees in part of the decision-making process, whether they're a health and safety rep or a joint health and safety committee member, that's going to help you identify any hazards that you may not see, or any of the tasks that you may not know that may unknowingly expose them to a higher risk of contracting COVID-19. So work with your staff, instill the confidence in your staff, have toolbox training sessions with them. But at the end of the day, if they're not following your rules, you have a workplace to make safe. And that's really the theme, that's really the theme of, I guess, all of our conversations for, the past few months now, is you have an obligation to make the workplace safe. And that means that everyone is working together as a partnership. I do see that we are nearing the top of the hour, so I will take the time to start wrapping up. I apologize if I didn't get to all of your questions, but if you do have a resounding question after, then of course, absolutely feel free to reach out to us. We would be more than happy to help you in any difficult situations that you are dealing with, whether it's an HR issue, whether it is a health and safety issue. We at Peninsula are there to support you. So it was lovely speaking to you. Here's hoping that we hear from you soon. If you have any questions, like I said, reach out. And again, my name is Hope McManus. I hope you have a safe day. And until next time, please stay safe. So have a great day, everyone.